Let's bring in the rest of the roundtable right now and talk about the week's politics. Newark Mayor Cory joining us again. Good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Matthew Dowd, ABC's Matthew Dowd. Katrina vanden Heuvel, the publisher and editor of The Nation. And ABC's newest Washington correspondent, senior Washington correspondent, Jeff Zeleny from the New York Times. Welcome to you. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Rich.
Let's talk about gay marriage first, those historic arguments at the Supreme Court this week. And it certainly appeared that a lot of the justices at least may have been looking for a way out of this case on Proposition 8.
You want us to step in and render a decision based on an assessment of the effects of this institution, which is newer than cell phones or the internet?
We have 5 years of information to weigh against 2,000 years of history or more.
If the issue is letting the states experiment and letting the society have more time to figure out its direction, why is taking a case now the answer?
Matthew Dowd, it is perilous to try to read decisions into questions from the justice. I don't think anybody last year would have predicted the health care outcome based on the questions we saw. But there did seem to be a lot of discomfort on the part of the justices about stepping into this case as this nationwide movement is starting to grow.
Well, yeah, to me, it's actually surprising that the Supreme Court is that far actually out of tune with where the country is. The country right now, majority of the country right now supports same-sex marriage. A vast majority of the country. It's moved a lot in the last 10 years. The country is more evolved and more consistent on this issue than any other social issue that has come before the Supreme Court. More than it was in interracial marriage. Only 20% of people supported interracial marriage when the Supreme Court made that decision in 1967. More congened on this than civil rights. More congened on this than abortion. So the country is way ahead on this. So that's what I don't understand why the Supreme Court seems reluctant to weigh on an issue where the country has already moved on.
One argument could be, Congressman McKean, there's still more than 30 states that are banning gay marriage.
Yeah, now, I would right now be opposed to gay marriage. Having said that, even if I supported it, I don't believe the Supreme Court should be making that decision. I think if you have an institution go back 2,000 or 3,000 years, before it's changed, before all the unintended consequences can be thought through, it should work its way through state legislatures, through Congress, perhaps, so we can, again, we should have full equality as far as finances, as far as other issues. I'm just saying we don't know what all the consequences could be that are unintended right now. I think Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, for instance, with Roe versus Wade, that may have been a mistake, even from a pro-choice perspective, because it took it away from the legislatures and a lot of the social issues were not directly addressed.
Worried at all about a backlash if the Supreme Court were to step out and have a sweeping decision in support of gay marriage?
I'm not worried at all. Look, this is an anguished reality where we have a second-class citizenship for millions and millions of Americans who are denied over 1,000 laws. Thank God we didn't wait for the states on women's equality under the law. Thank God we didn't wait for the states on African Americans' equality under the law. Thank God we didn't wait for the states on intermarriage. So this, to me, is clearly, we know, as King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
And
we know
Katrina,
where things are going.
it seemed as if, you can't know this for sure either, but that the case came to the Supreme Court in the first place because the most conservative justices thought this might be their last best chance while they still had a majority to hold the line.
Well, justice delayed is justice denied, but I think that the Supreme Court is lagging so far behind now that marriage equality has won in this country.
It's the only thing you and Rush Limbaugh agree on.
Well, but it is moving. In states, it's moving politically. And I think you've seen perhaps the most rapid mass evolution on an issue among our politicos as well. They know where the future of this country is. It is also a qualifier to win a next generation. So I think whatever happens in the court, and it may well be that Justice Kennedy's consuming affection for state rights does lead to overruling DOMA, I think we are going to see a social, moral, and political paradigm shift that is extraordinary.
And we already saw a glimpse of it this week, not only at the court, but Jeff Zeleny, I want to bring you in on this, but first show, you had 6 Democratic senators, many of them in red states, we're going to show them right here, flip on the issue of same-sex marriage just this week alone, and that prompted a comment from the bench from Chief Justice Roberts.
You don't doubt that the lobby supporting the enactment of same-sex marriage laws in different states is politically powerful, do you?
With respect to that categorization of the term for purposes of heightened scrutiny, I would, Your Honor. I don't.
Really?
Yes.
As far as I can tell, political figures are falling over themselves to endorse your side of the case.
pointed commentary from the Chief Justice. He also seemed almost scornful of President Obama. He said for trying to have it both ways on the Defense of Marriage Act.
It is stunning how fast everyone's moved on this, but Democrats are not doing this because they've suddenly come to this position. Most of them believe that already, but it's politically feasible and popular for them to do it. In fact, it's dangerous for them not to do it. So the question here politically
even in red states.
For Democrats, it probably is. But the thing that I'm really looking for going ahead here on the Republican side, when does this start to become okay to switch your position? And I'm looking at the donor class. There are more and more donors. Sheldon Adelson has said he doesn't care about same-sex marriage. Some other super PAC contributors are supportive of this on the Republican side. So looking ahead to 2016, that's the only way I can see this coming on the Republican side, or donors.
Are you feeling that change among your supporters?
There's definitely a change out there. There's no doubt about it. Now, if it's going to be sustained or not, I don't know. I think this, by the way, I know this sounds naive, should be addressed in a non-political way. I mean, my concerns are changing an institution that quickly. Just because you have 6 senators switching last week or you have polls reversing in 8 or 9 years, again, we have to look at the consequences of changing a 2,000-year institution.
George, and I want to talk about that. First is this issue is changing already. People sort of developed this myth about 2004 that gay marriage, the amendments on the ballot had an effect. I was there. They had no effect on the ballot. This issue has been changing for a while. But the argument to me that people say this is an institution that's been a traditional institution for 2,000 or 3,000 years ignores the fact that the institution that was, if you really want to go to a traditional marriage, it wasn't monogamous, races couldn't marry, women were property, and they couldn't give consent. That was the traditional view of marriage for 2,000 years. It isn't this. A marriage has always evolved over the course of time, and this is just another evolution. And I understand we're sensitive to the
changing it overnight with a decision is not evolving.
But it's not overnight. You know, same-sex marriage is a very, very important part of LGBT equality, but it's not the only part. And I do think some attention should be paid in Congress to reviving the federal Non-Discrimination Employment Act, which Representative Barney Frank and Senator Merkley introduced last year, because FBI numbers show a rise in hate crimes against gays, and there are at least 20 states in this country where there's still discrimination. So the marriage piece is important, but I don't think it should consume the full attention. Finally, the court has lagged behind, as Cory noted, on many issues. I mean, it lagged behind in Brown versus Board, and I think there should be a nod to the extraordinary progression which the president spoke of as an inaugural, from Stonewall to the Supreme Court. And it took activists and organizing and personal stories, people seeing in their own lives the reflection of
and let me just say,
bigotry.
The power of it can't be both ways. You can't say you're basing it on polls or basing it on public opinion. Then you have the referendum in California, which was adopted by a solid majority of the people, saying it should be struck down. So to me, there is still a conflict. The best way to resolve that, to me, historically, has been through the democratic process, not through 9 people sitting on a bench.
I respect that, but I also think it's an urban myth that mythology that Roe versus Wade, for example, elicited a backlash. I mean, Linda Greenhouse, the New York Times correspondent, wrote a book, Roe v. Wade, before Roe v. Wade, and very clearly the right wing was preparing to use abortion, even before that case, to realign the Republican Party to politicize evangelicals, and they did. They used it definitely.
Let's look at it from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a liberal justice of the Supreme Court.
I respect her view. Our legal correspondent, David Cole, agrees with that, but there are differences of views, and I think it's a mistake to say backlash, you can't move forward on rights, which is the story of America, expanding rights.
Age. 8 in 10 Americans born since 1980 support gay marriage. So we see how this is
One
moving.
thing you don't see moving in the president's direction since the inaugural is support for his proposals on gun control. And the president took issue with that this week and got quite emotional when he was talking about it.
Less than 100 days ago that happened. And the entire country was shocked. And the entire country pledged we would do something about it, and this time would be different. Shame on us if we've forgotten. I haven't forgotten those kids. Shame on us if we've forgotten.
Yeah, look at the latest poll from CBS. Support for gun control in December of 2012, 57% for new gun control laws, stricter gun control laws, now down to 47%, Cory Booker. So shame on who?
Well, shame on us, because the tragedies haven't stopped. there are still thousands of Americans that are being murdered every single day. We had an innocent man in my city murdered by a handgun that didn't come from our, the handguns in my city are not coming from within our state. And so this is very problematic when you have the majority of the people, 90% of Americans, 80% of gun owners agree on sensible gun reforms that would stop the carnage and the slaughter that goes on. I'm talking background checks. I'm talking punishments against straw purchasers. We're talking about secondary markets and making sure. Imagine TSA saying we're not going to check 40% of the people that board our planes. That's what we're doing right now. A terrorist in our country could go can't get on a plane to go there, but could go to certain areas of our country and buy trunk loads full of weapons. Americans are in agreement on this, and the tragedies continue.
So where is this going in the House, Congressman? We've seen a bunch of Republican senators come up this week and say they were going to filibuster that legislation in the Senate. Where's it going?
Let me say, I support the president's position on guns. So I'll say that. Having said that, it's going to be very difficult to get very meaningful legislation through the Congress because, despite what the mayor was saying, I think
Mayor
the number you showed,
Mayor
Booker. And Mayor Bloomberg. Is that, again, the majority of Americans don't seem to want this type of legislation, and I support it. So I am again, supporting legislation on gun trafficking, on background checks, assault weapons, all of that. But I just don't see the intensity building up.
And that's exactly what you're seeing in the Senate right now.
And it's not Senate Republicans here. This is Senate Democrats. I mean, you can go down the list of Democrats who are running for re-election, who are up for re-election in 2014, who are not supportive of anything beyond background checks. Max Baucus from Montana, Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, et cetera. So the president is talking a lot. His event at the White House was a big moment. He's going to out on the stump this week to talk about this as well. But behind the scenes, they realize that the assault weapons ban and other things are non-starters.
Anything more you could have done?
The fight is not over. You cite the CBS poll, cite your own poll, the ABC poll, which when asked not about stricter gun regulation, but about universal background checks, 90% support that. How many things in America do 90% of Americans support? 60% military-style assault weapon ban. Listen, when in our collective grief over Newtown, we thought things would move in this Congress. This Congress doesn't move very well. It took 5 years to pass the Brady Bill, and in the 90s, a ban on assault weapons and large-capacity assault magazines. So I think you're seeing movement. Responsible gun owners are being peeled away from the NRA. You're seeing movement. You're seeing a movement. You're seeing money come in, which didn't exist in the 90s, so it couldn't counter the NRA's countervailing huge amount of money. The movement, I think, will play a role as it did in the 90s to slay this beast. And we will see movement, and it will force a vote on certain amendments, even if you don't get the military-style assault weapons ban.
I live in Texas, living in the heart of gun ownership and being a gun owner myself. I think what happens in these situations is yes, there's a huge part of the country that supports various things, the background checks, the high-capacity clips, all of those things the country supports by and large by huge margins in that. But I think what happens is there's a sense of people out in the country, out in middle America, that there's some elite trying to tell us what to do. Yeah, we want those things. Yes, they need to be restricted. Yes, we need to protect our children. But some elite somewhere, some mayor somewhere, somebody sits out there trying to tell us what to do.
So Bloomberg's effort actually hurts.
I actually think when he goes, into my mind, and when he goes too far out of the way that says, here's what I know what's best for you, as opposed to here's a reasonable approach, this is what's going to save lives. I think all that could pass. The problem in Washington, D.C. is they're traditionally afraid of their own shadow. And the NRA has become a myth in Washington, D.C. The NRA is not as powerful as anybody thinks.
That's right.
But politicians in Washington think it is, and so they don't do anything in response to that. If they passed reasonable gun-restrictive measures, the country would support them.
But look at 2014.
For a second, because the reality is Mayor Bloomberg is not the boogeyman that he's being made out to. He has actually joined with a coalition of mayors. There are hundreds of us, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, have joined in the coalition. And what we've been saying for years now is exactly what you said, common sense rules and regulations. And so this is the point. The NRA is doing a wonderful job of obscuring this issue. We've even made the mistake in our rhetoric. Those senators that you said are not against background checks. We have background checks right now. Over 70,000 people.
Just making them universal.
Just making them universal.
Some support the background checks.
And I support strict background checks, but the real opposition, people don't want, for instance, exchanges among families being reported or among friends. Well, the fact is that's often where the criminal guns are handed down. So, again, it's a lot tougher, but I support it. I'll do whatever I can to get it through.
From this, from marriage equality to this, the simple question is, do you believe in America that the power of the people is greater than the people in power?
Right.
And I see on both of these issues, the American public has shifted dramatically to do common sense things that protect and affirm individual rights, but also give us safety.
One issue that actually is moving in Congress right now, or seems to be moving in Congress, immigration reform. We only have a couple of minutes left, but Jeff Zeleny, it does appear there was a breakthrough on this issue trying to get a bipartisan immigration reform proposal just this weekend.
Right, and this is a big deal. This has been historically one of the key sticking points here, the guest worker program. And unions, big labor has always been opposed to this. So there was an agreement reached Friday night between the labor coalition and the business coalition over this guest worker program. Senator Schumer was sort of brokering this, so now they're taking it back to the Gang of Eight. Senator Marco Rubio
released a group of bipartisan senators coming up for the legislation.
Senator Marco Rubio released a statement just this morning, and he is saying this sounds good, but hold on a little bit. Conservatives and Republicans are slightly uneasy of looking like this is being pushed through. They still want to have some debate on this, but this is a big deal. So when Congress comes back next week, one of these big immigration
momentum is building.
This is political suicide for the Republicans if they don't really
if they
don't go along with immigration. I mean, as you head into 2014, the Republican Party is a values-challenged party. They have big problems on immigration, on same-sex marriage, on gun reform, common sense gun reform. So I think this is going to be a testing case.
We only have 30 seconds left. The Republican leadership seems to have gotten this message in both the House and I think the Senate.
Well, it's taken a series of elections for them to get that message. The fastest rising group in this country, Latinos, if they don't figure out a way to how to deal with them and be in relationship with Latinos, they're going to be a minority party for the next generation. That's the problem in this situation. They understand they have to do something. They're trying to keep their base happy, but they know they have to do something.
There still is a real issue with border security. And 8 guys in a room saying the border is going to be secure is not enough. For 27 years, they've not been able to secure the border. If that can be done, then I think you'll find strong support for it. I'm pro-immigrant. I grew up in an immigrant neighborhood. But the fact is, the border security is real. It's not some made-up issue. And even if we have to resist the zeitgeist, we'll have to do it.
But there's other types of security as well. There are immigrants in our country who are being abused by unscrupulous employers, violating their human rights. There's victims of crime in my city. I see it all the time. Immigrants are targeted, and they're afraid to come forward and even report the crime. These are the kind of things we also need to be talking about.
That's going to have to be the last word. Thank you all very much. We'll be right back.